Hello everyone, my name is Ives and I am one of the two co-founders at CodeSandbox. And today is a very big day for us because I am going to announce something that we have been working on for over a year now. And before I'm actually gonna show you what we've been working on, I want to tell you why we started working on this. And to do that, we have to go back 5 years when CodeSandbox started. Before we released CodeSandbox, I noticed that it was pretty hard for me as a developer to collaborate with my coworkers. Whenever I had a question about a piece of code or my coworker had a question, we had to send these little code snippets on Slack, really. And we just had to decipher what was going on. And we could share branches, and we did, but then you would have your laptop always with you if you needed to answer a question. And this is quite frictionful, but imagine if you're learning how to code. If you learn how to code, in this case, you first have to think about the tooling that you need to install before you can actually run the code. You have to think about the bundler, the editor, even things like the terminal. And so this is why we started CodeSandbox. With CodeSandbox, we want to make it possible for you to just go to a link and you have running code right in front of you. You can edit the code and you can immediately see what is going on. And if you're happy with the code, you can just share a link with people and they see what you're working on. You don't have to think about what dependencies, what environment, what node version you have to install. So this worked quite well. We built a version in the browser. We were able to execute the code in the browser. But because of this, we also had a bit of a limitation. We were only able to support prototypes and small projects. And that worked really well for collaborating with other people on code. But as CodeSandbox grew and as more people started using CodeSandbox, we got more requests for things like support for bigger projects or support for more code editors or for support for better source control. And one team that noticed this was Excalidraw. That's the whiteboarding tool that we use quite a bit. It started as a prototype on CodeSandbox, but as it grew, it started to need more features that CodeSandbox initially wasn't built for. So with the CodeSandbox team, about a year ago, we went to the drawing board and asked ourselves, what would a perfect development flow look like if we started from scratch? How can we make this CodeSandbox experience work for any project of any size and integrate it with your existing development workflow? This is the question that we asked a year ago. We started to rebuild CodeSandbox from the ground up, and now we are super excited to finally share what we've been working on. So we've just shown you a glimpse of CodeSandbox projects. CodeSandbox projects is an online development environment that kind of feels like CodeSandbox, but we've built it from the ground up to work with any project of any size with the tooling that you're already used to. We've been using CodeSandbox projects also for the last 6 months to develop CodeSandbox projects, so there's a bit of CodeSandbox projectception in there. During this live stream, we're going to show you how CodeSandbox projects works and how it can really change collaboration within teams, but also how it can change open source development. During the first demo that will start in a moment, we'll give you a small overview of CodeSandbox, but also how it integrates with your existing tooling. So let's get to it. As you can see, CodeSandbox project looks quite familiar, maybe a bit like CodeSandbox, but under the hood and well, also over the hood really, there are a ton of changes and I want to show you some of those. The first one that I want to show you is already in the URL. We are currently looking at a sandbox, a branch really, that is imported from GitHub, CodeSandbox applications. And this is the crucial part. We're looking at the main branch and you can see that here too. Within CodeSandbox, we have said that every branch has its own URL. It has its own development environment. And for example, if someone would open the same branch as mine, if someone would open main, for example, they will be able to see me in the same environment. We'd be able to see each other's dev tools. We'd be able to see each other's code changes. And this is crucial. So let's say I want to make a change. For that, I click fork because I want to make my change in a feature branch. And what we do right now is generate a new branch for you, create a new branch, do yarn install, start the dev server, the whole flow of getting you a new development environment. And we do this within a couple seconds. This is very important for us because this way, if every branch has its own development environment, you can very easily, for example, switch between branches without having to think about doing yarn install, or if you want to review a pull request, then you can quickly switch. So let's say I want to make a change. One thing that's very important about CodeSandbox is that we want to build tooling that is very accessible. Tooling that make it easier for you to make changes, make you faster. And so one of these, what I've just shown, is the inspect. I clicked on a component and I immediately go to the code that renders that component. So I can, for example, change this to welcome to chicken soup and it will update. But another interesting thing here is that we're not looking just at a random repository. We're actually looking at the repository that we use to develop CodeSandbox. So now I have the dev server has started, well, this editor, and I can now develop CodeSandbox in CodeSandbox, kind of like a CodeSandboxception. And the same tooling works here as well. So for example, if I want to change this test sandbox to hello test sandbox, I can open the inspector, I can click on test sandbox, I immediately go to the code for that test sandbox, and I can say, for example, hello test sandbox. All to say, this works for really any size. When I'm done, when I'm ready to get feedback from other people, we can click open PR. We integrate within the existing workflows, and what happens right now is that we run the checks and we commit your changes. And we found it incredibly important to make this a very fast experience, to make this a single click, because this makes people developing faster, but it also makes contributing more accessible. You don't have to think about how to make the commit. You don't have to think about creating a commit, pushing, and opening the pull request. We do all of this in one flow for you. So, as you can see, the changes are in here in the pull request. And I can say here, update things. And of course, I can ignore this template. Not saying you should. And I can say, I added some small changes. I can then ask Christian for me to review, and I will create the pull request.
Okay, so I'm here working on CodeSandbox projects on a branch called demo branch. But I just got a notification from Yves about a different branch he has a pull request on, and he wants my review on it. So what I'll do is that I'll move over to that PR and let's look at the changes he made. Now, welcome to chicken soup. That makes perfect sense to me. But this hello repo is a little bit curious. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this link for VS Code, and that will actually open up a new window. And this new window is now connected to the environment of Yves's PR, and it has not disrupted my own branch, which is great. So we are going to look at the CodeSandbox project's extension here, which gives me information about the branch. I can see that Yves is still on this branch, and we can see that a port is running here. If I had any other extensions installed here, they would also be available just as you know it from local VS Code. So let's open up the preview and take a look at this change Yves made. And here we can see hello test sandbox. Now this does not really make sense. So I'm going to ask Yves to change this. I don't think this is right. So I'm going to do that by following him. And doing so, I can see that he has this file open. I can now see that he's scrolling down. And let's see if we can find it there. And I'm telling Yves that he should remove hello. And no hands from me. This is Yves changing from the project editor on his side. So I'll ask him to commit this and update the PR, and then I can just close this, and I'm back working on my own branch.
We just showed you how you can use your existing Git repositories and tooling like VS Code with CodeSandbox. And this is very important for us because if you have your extensions and your key bindings, you should be able to use them with CodeSandbox. The other thing that we've shown is this little inspector thingy in the preview, and that's quite new. That's very important for us as well because it doesn't only make you more productive, it also makes development more accessible because, for example, if you're less used to a code base, you can click on a component and see where it's rendered. Or if you're completely new to coding, it's also very useful. You can, in that case, also click on a component and at least play with the props of that component to really, well, play with how the component renders. For the next demo, we're going to show more of CodeSandbox itself. We're going to show the dev tools, and there is also a really interesting part where we show you how CodeSandbox can be used beyond your laptop.
With CodeSandbox, if I have an idea, it's really easy to get started. Regardless of whether or not I want to use my idea in an existing project or start out from scratch, the dashboard has everything that I need. With the new project function, I can start with a template or a blank project, or even import from GitHub, either from my own account or from an organization that I have access to. Last night I had an idea for a feature in this Excalibur Firebase repository, so I imported it into the CodeSandbox team so that I could share it with my colleagues. If I open it, you can see all of the branches and their various states. I don't have anything in a PR review, so everything is either in drafts or, as you can see, main is in staging. Draft Nicewater is the name of the branch that was automatically created. I can easily rename this to something that would align with my team's naming conventions, but since this is just for fun, I decided to leave it. As I get started, you'll see a few things happening automatically. CodeSandbox auto-detects scripts from package.json and puts them into DevTools. By default, we'll show the preview because it's a really nice place to get going to see your code already running up in a browser. If I want to see something different in the Sidekick, I can go up to DevTools and see what's running. I have the ability to add a terminal, or if I want to see the logs for my preview that's already running, I can open up my logs. This is a dev server, so this is just my dev server that started up when I kicked off the branch, and if there are any errors in here, you can see that. Now I'm going to go ahead and close these to make room. I'm going to close this and I'm just going to minimize that, and I'll take you through the feature that I had. So I came up with this idea to add in a navigation a confetti when I open up an Excalibur. I thought it'd be a little fun to add some zest to it. So you can see down here that I've got my confetti with a particle count, and then I set a timeout so that I had some time for the confetti to fall before the account or before the Excalibur was created. Let's see if that's working. All right, so I've got my timeout, I've got my confetti, everything seems to be working just fine. I think I'm ready to show this to someone, but before I do, I'm going to just run some tests to see how this goes. So in my tasks, I'm going to run test, which again is the script that's in my package.json to run tests. I can edit it there. And if I kick that off, you can see the test running. I don't have too many. and it looks like there is an issue. So if I come up here, I can see that this navigation was not called with the expected ID. So I'm going to just open that up and take a look. And full disclosure, I have spent a bit of time on this. I knew it was going to fail. I'm not really sure what's going on. I'm going to go ahead and phone a friend for this. So I'm going to share this with Carlos, my colleague, who's very good at timing and tests, and see if he knows what's going on here.
Nicolene has just sent me a link to her project, but I don't have my laptop with me. That's not a problem because CodeSandbox now has an iOS application that allows you to develop using your iPhone or your iPad. With CodeSandbox for iOS, I can do everything that I will be able to do with CodeSandbox. It's connected with all the other clients, and it's really the first iOS application that allows you to do full stack web development. Nicolene mentioned that she had an issue getting her test to pass with her recent confetti additions. If I run the test, I can see where it's failing. Let's take a look at what this code is testing. It looks like this test is running before the timeout finishes, so one way we could fix this is by adding the same timeout to the test. Okay, let's try to run the test again. It looks like it's working, so if we commit the changes, Nicolene should be able to continue with her work.
So now it's possible to do development right from your iPhone or your iPad. And this is really big. I think this is the first time that you can actually do full web development natively from your iPad. And more people will start doing this. And it's connected to VS Code through CodeSandbox projects for that matter. So it's quite an interesting way for you to work from one device to the other. With the last two demos, we've shown you different parts of CodeSandbox projects. And I am super curious to hear what you think. We have a waitlist open, so you can apply to that. But we've currently shown you mostly how CodeSandbox projects works with your existing projects. Open source has always been very important for CodeSandbox. We started as an open source project, so we wanted to make the open source flow work really well with CodeSandbox as well. And so we have one more demo for you to show how you can use CodeSandbox with open source. So we started this live stream explaining how the team at Excalidraw was not able to use CodeSandbox effectively at some point. So it only makes sense to really demo Excalidraw and CodeSandbox projects at the end of the live stream. And that is exactly what you're looking at right now. This is Excalidraw actually running in CodeSandbox projects. And it's also more than that. We're not just looking at my version of Excalidraw. This is the open source version of Excalidraw. This is the master branch, and anyone could really access this. If you're an open source maintainer, you can take this link, share it with the world, and people will see a running version of your project, even if they don't have write access. They can even see it with read access. So for example, they have autocomplete. They even can run parts of the code to see how it works. And that is pretty interesting. So for example, we know we are running your code. So in the README, we have made some changes. And for commands that we detect that can be runnable, we actually show this button here, this play button. This allows you to run the code and play with it before you even fork the repository yourself. So that is super interesting, because often it is very hard to get started with contributing because you have to know how to set up the environment and everything, but here we do that for you. The other part of contributing that's quite cumbersome is setting up the repository. Like if you want to contribute, you have to fork then you have to clone it, you have to create a branch, you have to set the upstream, you have to make your changes, create a commit, push it to GitHub, and then open a pull request on GitHub. And this is not very accessible. There are a lot of people who get stuck on this process alone. So we wanted to make this more accessible too. And so on CodeSandbox, if you want to contribute, you only have to press fork. And we will handle creating the repository, creating the branch, starting the dev server, making sure that the environment actually runs. And that is incredibly important because now you don't have to think about those things, which is very, well, it's an important value for CodeSandbox. So I could, for example, make a change. Let's say you have an open source repository. You could even have code blocks that run for a specific language, like in JavaScript, you can have 1+1, and if I click it, it will actually return 2. You can do this in the context of your library too, so there's so many exciting things that you can do with this. Now, if I've made my change to Excalidraw and I actually want to, well, contribute it back, I can click Open PR. We will handle committing and pushing for you, and it will open a PR to that Excalidraw repository. So this is, in a nutshell, what CodeSandbox Projects is. And we are super excited about this, and we're very curious what you think. Send us a message on Twitter or Discord to let us know what you think. And if you want to start using this, we have a waitlist of CodeSandbox projects that you can find under projects.codesandbox.io. And we also made sure that for the URLs that are publicly available, you can access them without waitlist access. So in this case, you will have read-only access to the repository, but you can already explore the repository. And if you're in the waitlist, you can fork. We really think that this can change how open source development is done, how teams collaborate. It will make development more accessible as a whole. And well, we're very excited about this, and we're super, super curious what you think. So leave us a message.